Hamjambo.
Addittion.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Dr. Melba, thank you for that introduction. I like to say that the EB stands for Extractives Blessing. So asante sana. The Honorable Principal Secretary, State Department of Petroleum, Andrew Kamau, distinguished guests, industry experts, civil society, the media, Hamjambo tena.
Jambo.
My name is Dr. Gaduru, and I'm from a company called Kipia Africa. Today we have a very interesting discussion on in-country value addition going beyond oil and gas. But before I get into that discussion, allow me very briefly to make a couple of comments coming out of this morning's discussion. The PS asked the question, is there local content in the early oil pilot scheme? I think this is an extremely pertinent question. Is there? I would like to speak on behalf of Kipia and say absolutely there is. I see one of our clients in the room. Thank you for the business. We are currently training people in oil production technology right here in Nairobi. Another question was posed. Can we do international business? Can we move beyond Kenya? Again, I speak for ourselves. I'm pleased to say we are supplying specialized manpower for wireline logging and slickline in Ethiopia for gas drilling. So it's possible. It is very possible. And we are blessed that we've had these opportunities. Last Friday, Kipia, my team, we launched a drilling activity index for Kenya, and we will also extend it to the region. In this drilling activity index, in 2017, last year, 1.2 million drill meters were done in Kenya. 1.2 million drill meters. Now, just to keep it in context, for us, drilling is water well drilling, mining, exploration and production, geothermal drilling for steam, construction drilling, where you're installing fiber optic cables and instead of cutting through or cutting across the highway, you drill underneath the highway, foundation drilling as well, and of course, oil and gas. Of those 1.2 million drill meters, only 9,800 came from oil and gas. The drilling business in Kenya last year was 22 billion Kenya shillings. The oil and gas industry contributed 10% of that. So just trying to give you some context in relation to how can we go beyond oil and gas in terms of in-country value addition. Allow me now to invite my distinguished panel to join me here. And what I will do is I will call out their names and read their bios, and as I do that, please feel free to join me here. I will start with the ladies. Alaka Lugonzo, who is the coordinator of the Association for Women in Energy and Extractives in Kenya. Karibu sana. Let's give her a round of applause. Ms. Alaka is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, specializing in energy and extractives. She is currently the coordinator of the Association of Women in Energy and Extractives in Kenya, otherwise known as AWI. She holds a Master in Energy Law and Policy with a distinction from the renowned, I beg your pardon, Center of Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law and Policy in the University of Dundee in Scotland. Karibu sana. Karibu sana. I'd like to invite Ikal Angelei, the Director of Friends of Lake Turkana. Karibu sana, Ikal. Let's give her a warm round of applause. Ikao is currently the director of Friends of Lake Turkana. She has 5 years experience working on environmental and natural resource governance and advocacy. She is skilled in community mobilization and advocacy, gained at the award-winning Kenya Environmental Campaigns organization. She holds a master's in public policy from the State University of New York. Welcome. Welcome, Ika. Now to the gentlemen, allow me to invite Bwana Moses Njero, the CEO of the Kenya Chamber of Mines. Welcome, Moses. Bwana Njero is a mining engineer by profession. He has 18 years of experience in the minerals sector, having worked for the Ministry of Mining in Kenya. Over this period, he has worked as a senior inspector of mines, a warden of mines, commissioner of mines, and geology at the same ministry. He holds a master's degree from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Welcome, welcome, Bwana Njero. I'd like to invite Bwana Odenda Lumumba, the CEO of the Kenya Land Alliance. Mr. Lumumba is a land rights activist and a founder and coordinator of the Kenya Land Alliance, a policy, land laws, and institutional reforms advocacy network. He is working on his PhD in land and agrarian studies and holds a master's of philosophy in the same field from the University of Western Cape. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to invite back to the stage my brother, Ken Hyumbe, who is the head of corporate planning and strategy at the National Oil Corporation of Kenya. Karibu sana. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get straight into the core of it. We want to discuss in-country value addition going beyond oil and gas. We've got a lot of very critical comments about employment and skills, procurement, equity participation, but I want to ask our panelists some very specific questions about how we can go beyond oil and gas. I would like to start with Ikao. In the local community, and let's take now in the case of Turkana, there is the need for skills transfer to work in the oil and gas sector. How can we use this knowledge and skills learned to go beyond oil and gas? How can we get them involved in the areas of direct participation in oil and gas? Yes, but also indirect and induced opportunities. Please give us your views.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see some good comrades here. The name of networking, Hans doesn't tell you this, but he has a lovely bakery that you should all try. In regards to that question, I think one of the key things that very few people do not talk about, and Anthony Paul doesn't mention, is the aspect of access to information and transparency around it. That the fact that if we don't have access to information, a lot of the engagement with the direct or indirect are going to be piecemeal and push for patronage spaces. So in this particular case, take for example, when Talo came into Turkana, there was a push for people getting loans to buy cars. A few years later, they can't pay the loans. So it's a critical thing to make access to information core to this conversation. As much as we talk about local content, without the access to information, the transparency to the entire process, then we are dealing with this piecemeal. And then, in regards to sort of like beyond the oil, I'm not, one of the things that people don't mention is a few years ago, Lokichogyo was the buzz of activity. People built a lot of buildings and businesses At that particular time, hotels were going for in the dollars, so you get a hotel at $100. That was a small room and bathroom and toilet outside. But then when the UNHCR team left, a lot of those buildings are left empty, and it's a critical conversation to have. So how does this build into the bigger, whether it's Vision 2030, and what are we doing? Right now, the current way that it's being done is very piecemeal and tokenistic. And until we move away from that and not just talk about local content and we talk about local participation, is when we will change the discourse. I think it's a matter of changing the discourse and the narrative from a very tokenistic perspective that it is right now in this country to a participation and a real participation level.
Excellent. Access to information, local participation. Ken, we have heard in the news about the upcoming dual listing of the National Oil Corporation of Kenya. And ICAL has her checkbook ready. When will she be able to participate? And is this the model that the companies in extractive sector and beyond oil and gas in other industries should be looking at? That we can be able to buy equity into the companies.
Thank you, Dr. Amuro. Thank you for putting me on the spot. That question should have been directed to the guy who was sitting there with the PS. Absolutely. Well, maybe take a step back. So in every license, the government has an equity interest, which government can choose to exercise at the point of declaration of commerciality. Now, as you all know, in Lokicha, we have commercial discoveries of oil and gas. So government has the option of participating in up to 22.5% in one license and 20% in another license. And that right is exercised through actual contribution. Now, we all know Treasury does not have a check that it can write. We have all these competing interests. And that right is exercised on behalf of the government by the national company. Hence the genesis of the listing discussions. And the whole idea around listing is then to access international and domestic capital to be able to fund part of this equity right. But importantly, is to give an avenue for Kenyans to participate in this sector as in this nascent stage as it evolves. So to your question, Gaduru, it's an avenue that local companies should also explore. We look at Toronto Stock Exchange, we look at London Stock Exchange, that are driven a lot by small companies that raise equity, especially for oil and gas exploration, which is a risky venture and which obviously banks will not finance, but raise equity through these very vibrant methods. So to your point, definitely, it's an area that increasingly we should explore. I think the first company that listed here in Nairobi Stock Exchange was offering services. Unfortunately, it came at a point where the industry globally was going down, but definitely a lot of opportunity to raise capital to finance the operations of a lot of you seated here through opportunities within the stock exchanges. Yeah.
Very good, excellent. Thank you for that. Now, in relation to equity participation, I want to ask Bonajero to give us a reflection from the mining side, because we have a mining policy, we have the Mining Act of 2016, we have regulations in mining that deal with local content, and specifically we have a law that says for certain size of operations there will be the need to list for public participation. Bonajero, please give us your reflection in relation to in-country value addition. Has the mining sector got it right? What exactly is happening? And are there any gaps?
Thank you very much, Dr. Gaduru, for that question. If you have listened to the discussions going on for the 2 days, this being the second day, much or most of us must have mentioned the word local content or value addition. The local content basically is what is the share of the benefits towards the people of Kenya. The local content, when Anthony talked, I could define it from another angle that also reflects on the emerging benefits. What can we do? When we talk of the value addition, it brings you to a question. First, the value. Before you have the value, you must have the value. So, what value do you have before you start talking of value addition and strategies to value add? And that is where we come with policy development, acts, and regulations. In our policy development, at times we get it wrong, we revise them. Our acts, we get them wrong, we revise them. And to just mention what Gajul is talking about, I will refer to section 48 of the Mining Act, which says, for any large-scale company, 10% of your shareholding should be given to government free. So that presents a call for decision making by the investor. Section 49 continues to say, for any mining license, and for any owner of the mining license, should be ready to list in a stock exchange 20% of his shareholding. So as an investor, I will look and say, Kenya, I come to you and I use 30% of my company, the 30% controlling power of my company, that calls for a decision. Then we start saying, oh, we have this, we have that, we have this potential, we have that potential. Why are we saying we have all these potentials? Because we are looking for a strategic investor to come and invest in, create value in that potential we have, right? Mm-hmm. We are looking for a strategic investor to come and create value on our potential or make an opportunity out of the potential we have.
So what you're saying is that not only do you have to give free carried interest, but also you have to list.
Exactly.
And the argumentation you're giving is that there could be a need here for a balance between what we want as in-country value addition and what investors may be willing to give.
And that is now the reason for engagement.
So, we will come back to you again, Bwana General. I want to inform the audience of something slightly different. I see my friend Julius here, he may be aware of this from a few years back. My wife is from Lokicha, and she went to school in Lokicha Primary. She's a graduate of Lokicha Primary School. I want to ask Alaka to reflect on this in relation to gender and gender's involvement and participation. Am I local content? Have I gone beyond oil and gas? Am I local? And as you're telling us how gender can be involved and go beyond oil and gas, okay. I'm ready for my 5%.
Well, sadly, you're not local content, but by virtue of the fact that you're married to a lady who's from Lokicha, then she probably will benefit and you will benefit, so you're lucky. So anyway, on the issues of gender, I'd like to say something, then come to your question about in-country value addition. I think we need to also realize that we have, I feel like as a part of the oil and gas industry, we've stopped everything. Yet we understand that there are so many, as they said, moving parts. There are so many other industries that have already been established around the oil and gas industry. So I feel like for Kenya as a country, we need to first stop and reflect and see there is the manufacturing industry that has been there for a long time. There's the agricultural industry, there's the tourism industry. For me, I feel like those are the industries that will actually benefit from this conversation with local content, because I feel like the spills are more than the actual oil and the the resources that are around the oil and gas industry. So coming back to gender, I'm happy to be living in an era whereby government actually recognizes the youth, the persons with disabilities, and the women. But we also need, as she said, what is the information that we're giving outside there? How are we managing this information? Where are we going to get this information? How am I going to know that somebody in Turkana or a woman in Turkana or myself can get into a bus or a plane and go to Turkana and access these opportunities and this 30%? And then also, how are we monitoring and evaluating these issues? So fine, I'm a female-owned and run businesses, and I got, say for example, a tender. Is it for me and 5 other men down the line, or for me and the women in Turkana to benefit from those issues? So I feel like if we can manage the information that we're putting outside there, if we can educate, and if we can tell these people that the opportunities that are, in terms of local content, then probably we would benefit, and you would benefit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bwana Odenda, we have national priorities. We outline them as the big 4. So, housing, health, manufacturing, and food security. In relation to land and the idea that we want in-country value addition that goes beyond oil and gas, could you please paint a picture for us? How can we align to our national priorities? How can we leverage the land we have to, say, for example, secure the food on our tables?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the first element we have to make a recognition is that starting with the oil itself is embedded in land. All spaces you need to develop that industry is within the space that you call land. All the elements of the 4 pillars we are talking about is about land. Now the question is, if you start from a very immediate center of attraction where oil was struck, whose land is that land? I think that's very, very, very key. In the first instance, that land belongs to the community around that area. And all that we are trying to raise will have to be all over that space. But even beyond that, you are looking at all these pillars alongside all the territory that you are going to lay the infrastructure connecting. For example, the infrastructure you are connecting from Lokcha the whole way to Lando. It opens up a big territory of well over 1,300 kilometers by average, running that distance. What is it that we are going to do along that? Of course, definitely, food is a must, that everybody needs food on table. Can we grow food along all that area? Yes, we can, and why not? Is there any other natural resources that are impetus to that we are looking at, which are also land-based? In the very immediate time when we discovered the oil in Turkana, there was this hearsay of Lokipi, massive water discovered somewhere in Turkana. Like God will hide everything in Turkana, oil was hidden there, water was hidden in there. How do we use that? There are at least few rivers that have energy to traverse that arid land up to the area where the oil is. Even the oil itself requires water to bring it out of that element. But can we use that water against all the other pillars we're talking about? I think we can. And therefore, again, we are looking about the territorial space. Where is water coming from, linking up this whole place? So one thing I will basically say is that land is a major factor in the 4 pillars, to the extent that you cannot produce any food without land as a factor. And that land is across the country. But that land, the biggest area of land, by dividing Kenya in any subdivisions of counties, the second largest is Turkana. with 700 square kilometers of that land. So you cannot be looking for land in spaces. Some of the spaces where you think the agriculture, they hardly have 3,000 square kilometers of land. And you are forgetting about these other spaces that are very big. You are talking about manufacturing alongside all the elements that will go to extractive industry. Where are you going to lay it? You are talking about housing. Housing is required. She was just talking about a few houses that came up in Lokicha. But you need housing all along the Lapset corridor, all along the whole route going to, for the oil exports to Mombasa. You need all those things. So
it's very clear.
In my view,
Yes.
Whether you want to succeed in extractive industry, one thing you must succeed is about your land use policy as a space. Remember, our oil is onshore, it's not offshore. Some of these examples
Well,
are mentioned here.
we want to just hold that because we will give you another opportunity. But we want to focus on manufacturing very briefly. And I want to bring in Bonajero on mineral processing, which supports the big four manufacturing. What exactly is happening in the mining sector, and how is it going to support in-country value addition beyond oil and gas?
Thank you very much, Dr. Kadu, once again. That's a very key issue to us as a country. Our minerals, or rather minerals, have no value if the products they make have no value. The value for minerals is usually derived value. The demand for minerals is derived demand. So as a country, if we are going to encourage processing and manufacturing or utilization of our minerals, we will be creating a demand for our minerals. We will be giving our minerals a value. If you look at what is happening, let me give you an example of Central Grass. Central Grass gets the sodas from Lake Magandi. They get the limestone from wherever they get because it's there. They get the silica sand from Kwale, it's there. And they are able to manufacture bottles. That's a perfect example of where we should be going. Look at the quarries. The quarry operators looks at, because building stones are minerals in Kenya, right? You get a volcanic tooth in the wilderness, looks at it and decides this is a perfect resource to manufacture building blocks, building ballasts, and you start developing it. If there is no need for housing, your investment goes to waste because nobody will come to buy the building blocks. But because we know housing in Kenya is a problem and is one of the big four, we need now to start thinking, how can we develop this sector? How can we encourage the investors in the quarrying sector to bring forth this material at affordable price so that I can own a house?
Excellent, excellent, Bonajero. Ika, we switch gears. So we have all these skills now that have been brought about and in the future due to oil and gas. But beyond that, how do we export these skills outside Kenya? What are your thoughts in relation to local community and export of skills?
Thank you. I think Mwende Nyaga asked something similar to that in Lodwar. And the question is, which skills first? Because there's all this skills development going on. And I think one of the things that we lack in this local content conversation is a real discussion that says, don't come and teach me how to do maths for my business. Even a person who's not going to school knows how to handle their money. But that's where the focus is. And I think if you look at spaces where there is a real development of skill, it is a linkage to the industry. So look at Siemens, look at a lot of the German companies, where you're trained for a couple of years and you're linked to the industry. If you come in and you take a garage owner and you link them to Toyota, by the time Toyota leaves, they have the name, and they can build from that. And there's a real skills transfer, not a, an imagined one. So there's a real one. So in terms of that, and I think what we need to, and I had PS come out talking about it, we need to ask ourselves, the way we are currently sort of like cushioning ourselves protectionist aspects, where we're saying we don't want this many people to come and work in this industry. When we are thinking about exporting these skills, where are the countries that we would export to? What are the provisions there? Because again, it's good to think, yes, we can export it, but every country is saying, we want this many skills. Ken was saying about Uganda. Actually, Uganda is national and local content now. They have both, and I saw this from Total, where they're actually saying there's the local and there's the national. And so when we're saying we're building the skills, whether it's technical, whichever, but we have to have a very candid conversation of, can these skills work within, and if we're exporting them to where, and what are the processes? Right now, Tanzania, we can barely get Kenyans working in Tanzania. So we had all these bankers in Tanzania, now they're being shipped here, hotel industry. So we have to also think about it, so that as we develop and say we're going to export it, where is this that is open to all? And they will not start to also create the policies that, are protectionist.
Thank you, thank you. I will ask one question to Ken, and then I will open it to the floor, so please prepare your questions. We will take about 3 questions from the floor, and then we will come back to the panel for some closing remarks. Ken, in relation to going beyond oil and gas, what are the opportunities for innovation? I think it was said earlier also by the PS, Kenya is known as the Silicon Savannah. There has been great strides in the ICT. Are there opportunities for us, taking what we're learning from oil and gas, how to add value in oil and gas? How can we go beyond this in an innovative approach? And is Kenya the right environment for this kind of thinking?
Thank you, Dr. Gadero. I think Kenya is naturally a hub, and when we evolve our industries, we evolve them around the hub concept. So to your question, yes, definitely, Kenya is the right, especially within the geography that we're in, Kenya is the right environment to sort of move this discourse beyond oil and gas. And to PS's point earlier, I think what we should be reflecting on is the transferability of the learnings and the skills that we are building within the oil and gas sector to other sectors beyond, beyond this sector in itself. When we talk about skilling our people in the areas of fabrication, when we talk about skilling our people in the area of drilling, electricians, plumbers, it's not just training for the oil and gas industry, but training for the construction industry in general. And this is where I see then, to your question, Kenya being moving beyond just exporting oil and gas as a resource or a value-added resource to even exporting labor to serve other sectors of the economy globally. And if there's one thing we are good at as Kenyans, obviously, is when we pick up a trade, then we're able to move it to the next level, and that's why we have such a huge diaspora out there. So really, for me, I see oil as an enabler to open other opportunities. But even as we do this, we must critically think through how are we transferring the lessons and the learnings from the sector to other aspects of the economy.
Great, great, thank you for that. We will take 3 questions from the floor. Please, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Thank you very much, panelists. My name is Faith Walter. My question is a bit of local content, but still within the industry. I'm concerned about the refinery in Mombasa, and my question goes to Ken. What is your take about Kenya purely exporting crude oil instead of having it refined, and we have some of the products utilized in our country? Number 2, should we have a refinery at the source instead of Mombasa, and we have one at Lokichar?
Thank you, Faith. We will take those two for now, so we give a chance to the rest. Asante Sana. And let's take another couple of questions before we come back to the panel. There's a lady on this table, and Kate, if you don't mind, right at the back, there's a lady who wants to ask the question. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Catherine Gila, Professor Catherine Gila from Moredat Institute of Oil and Gas and the Kenya Pipeline Company. Now, my question goes to, because I'm interested in capacity building, that's what I do. In terms of in terms of the community, since you are familiar with the community, definitely what has happened since the time, the inception, and when we say we have discovered oil in Turkana, what kind of community training, education, sensitization, so that these communities must have skills to understand that that oil needs to be extracted, it needs to be exploited, it needs to be produced, and now we are going to have crude oil, which then we can be able to transport, export, so before we can even talk about income. So if we receive any kind of community sensitization so that people understand the whole value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We'll take one last question from the back.
Yes, thank you very much, panelists. My question is on value addition. How can local community identify gaps for maybe so that they can contribute to the market? And my second question is on land. We find that whenever there is a speculation of maybe a mining, there are people who run their speculators. You find that the speculation and land fraud. How can we curb that? And also, how do we protect the community? Thank you.
Please remind us your name.
I'm Judy from Addittion.
Thank you. All right. I think we start with you, Ken. There was a question from Faith, which is really a very, very important question. We have a refinery in Mombasa. Maybe you can update the audience. The actual status, is it actually working or what happened? But also, very importantly, why are we exporting crude when we could potentially put in a modular refinery in Lokichar?
Okay. Thank you, Faith. Definitely, those are questions that we keep being asked. So just as a matter of fact, the refinery in Mombasa was shut down and is now being converted into a storage. As you're aware, it's also going to hold the crude that is set to be flagged off on that by the president. So it's been converted to a storage both for crude and refined products. Now the reason why it was shut, it was because it was running on very aged technology. I think the last upgrade was in the 70s. And as you understand, obviously, the refining industry has moved quite a bit. Now, to why the question of whether we should or should not have a refinery, I think let's first reflect on refining itself. Refining is a global industry. When you put a refinery, it has to be competitive from a global context, from what we call an import parity point of view. If we put up a refinery in Kenya, we need to be able to compete with 1.2 million barrels per day refinery in India, or 400, 500, 600 thousand barrels per day refinery somewhere in the Middle East. And that's usually is a question. However, I'm happy to note that technologies are changing, and one of which Dr. Gadul was mentioned, which is modular refining. Just like when you build, when kids build blocks, a modular refinery, you can bring it in modules or in blocks and be able to connect this. Because the challenge for us as a country with a conventional refinery is we have to build it in the scale that then it's able to compete with a similar facility, as I've said, in India, in the Middle East, so that then the government is not actually offsetting the cost of local products vis-a-vis, imported products. So the long and short of this is, yes, there are now discussions, looking at are there opportunities around modular refineries? Can we put small facilities which we scale up over time as we explore the production, how the production is happening, and the economics of the facility. So to your question, yes, we are now starting to look at this as an area, but it's still very, very unknown. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Ikal, the question from Professor, community sensitization, as we now go to the early oil production and full field development.
Thank you. I think the one thing, the attempt to do community sensitization is based on the information we get. As we all know, information in the oil sector is piecemeal here and there, and I think as all stakeholders in this room, if we don't start asking and demanding for access to information, this whole shebang we're going through is just for patronage and rent seeking. That is where I start from. So right now the community is based on that sort of piecemeal. Somebody within the company could sort of say, we are going to be doing contracts tomorrow, so you prepare this and that. Somebody who has information will prepare a few people to be able to access those opportunities. And so even the numbers that are put out there, it's who again we have to go back and say, who is this person who's getting this local content? And as of now, the community has sort of been dealing with the here and now as the sector provides, again because of lack of information. So until we can deal with that, the sensitization is based on the few who have access to that information who can engage the community. So like now, let's say for example, if the Tapel Dam is used for this, and it goes back to the issue of food security, if the Tapel Dam is going to be used for water into the oil, the tap well supports water all the way to the Lake Turkana. And it means that you're not only sensitizing the Lokicha Basin, you're sensitizing people until Tolonya who are affected by the Lake Turkana. So I think it's a critical conversation to really say what sort of sensitization is the focus just on the Lokicha Basin. We're a pastoralist community who use rangelands cut across, and so people from Lokicha will go to the north, and people from the north use these paths that are now cordoned off for oil operations. Who's being considered in this conversation? Is it just the Turkana South Basin, or is it bigger areas, including places like area where the CEC of minerals from Turkana comes from? So that then we actually be able to say who's being sensitized in this, so that the conversation of movement of this oil is owned by all, considering that the land is community land, as the one mentioned.
Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm informed we have run out of time. I was lost in this discussion, and I almost feel like we should continue, but I think there's other things to discuss in the course of the day, and I'm sure we will have opportunities to interact further. However, allow me just to get a closing remark from each one of them, and maybe to split Judy's question. Alaka, if you could just also address local community identification of gaps. Where can someone participate? And Judy, allow me to say even national, because in Kenya we have that distinction. How can any Kenyan participate? And then maybe a word of close, and we go through the panel, closing each of us. Odenda, if you could address also Judy's second part to the question, land speculation. Very, very briefly, and a closing word. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Just to say this is, I think it's important that we need to identify, as you said, the management of expectations and what is actually happening on the ground. We need to give practical information, and also be aware of the fact that these communities have also been marginalized. Therefore, we need to come off our high horses from sitting in Nairobi and actually moving down there and addressing the issues that are happening on the ground. And in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody. And one thing also, in terms of the issue on gender, I'm insisting, as a woman, as women, she's sitting here because she has identified these opportunities that are there and is taking them and is working towards them. Therefore, as you who are seated in the room, it's important that you also have and allow those spaces for us to come in and actually say we're here and we can identify ourselves. Thank you.
Professor, there are two people here from the county government. I think one of the things that the Trafalgar County government and most county governments are doing is capacity building. but then linking it to the industry. And right now, while some people have gone for training, I think if the pipeline is supposed to be built by some people who are not in this room, that specific skill to be able, the certification to enable local people or national people to be in that sector is lacking, and perhaps there's a need to do the linkage. And then lastly, I think, again, all the speakers in the morning who spoke here, and people, I think Tony Paul, good friend, I met him a long time ago, he's facilitating the process, and we have to own it. He's the brain, he's a brilliant person in the sector, but we have to reflect within and ask ourselves, what are the sectors that we've tried all this, and what do we need to do so that local content works for us and is owned by us, so that we're not just focusing on it. And lastly, Ghana and Trinidad, which everyone has focused on, have freedom of access to information. So until that happens, this again will be another talk shop.
My closing remarks is, the biggest mistake we can make is to assume we can make everybody a miner. Everybody would like to participate in mining venture if it's happening in your area. The biggest opportunity which comes with all this mineral development is look around and see what benefits are coming, the shared benefits like the local content, 20, 40, whatever the percentages, and what are the other emerging benefits, and strategize here. If you have knowledge on food production, just know there are people coming into this area, they will not carry their food, they will require food. That becomes an opportunity. They will require meat, chicken meat. That becomes an opportunity. So that we can stop only focusing on what the investor is doing and putting a lot of pressure on the investor to the extent that they will say, resource gas. Thank you.
I need to start with this question. First, it's important that we roll out the Community Land Act or provisions so that communities' ownership of land is secured. That's what will give it recognition, protection, and registration. Once that is done, the motive is basically to make land market vibrant. And if it is vibrant, then it is no longer about speculators. It's communities dealing with its own land, with whoever is the buyer at that end. That can only be further helped by a clear land use policy to guide which use do you put what kind of land at what time. So it's not about really just looking at speculators. I think it's to empower communities to engage in that market with a very clear foresight. In terms of concluding, how do we deal with this local content? I think local content comes from the fact that there's foreignness in oil and gas. The technology, the capital is foreign. It's coming from without. And we are now talking from within. Now, whether within is within the national boundaries or is it within the local community, I think what I would say will help is to have community, public, private partnership. And the reason I'm starting with the community, in these partnerships, we have been hearing banding around, is simply to a recognition that however way you look at it, all minerals, oil and gas being discovered in Kenya is embedded in the community space. And therefore, those people in that space must be a party to participate. You are calling for participation, it can't be private for others. It must start from those where these particular discoveries are being formed. I think for me that is the way to do. Have the community, they need the benefits. Have the government, they need the revenues. The private investor need the profit. But you cannot always neglect. Even now as we discuss, I must say this at a higher level, whatever higher level it is. I wonder how much of the communities in this Middle East, when you are talking about local content, were they excluded by any design? Or is he called the local content for the community? I doubt that.
Thank you. So first, I think I just want to echo what Ika said, that the government has given us an opportunity to define this journey for ourselves. We've got Tony Paul here, we've got SR leading this process, but it's not government that is going to give input to this. Well, government will be one of the stakeholders, but we are all here as stakeholders. Really, this is in our hands to define the local content space for this country, and we have an excellent opportunity, we have an excellent platform to do that. But coming to National Oil and why we've deliberately chosen to be a partner in this process is we recognize the important and the privileged role that we've been given as a national company to be the foundation and the platform on which local content then evolves. Again, going back to what I said earlier, that we're the biggest local content in this country. And really, our commitment is to help take this forward, to move this from being a private sector, being a community or a NGO or civil society dialogue, to being a policy dialogue. And that's where we see this moving to, and we want to champion that process moving forward.
Great, that's a great place to close. Ladies and gentlemen, involve women and youth. Give access to information. Unfortunately, not all of us can be miners. It all starts with land. Let's involve the community, and let's make this a policy dialogue. Join me in saying a warm thank you to this great panel. Asante.
Thank you so much. So that was interesting insights. I'm sure we all agree. We are now going to break for tea, and it's now 20 minutes, about 20 minutes to 12. I'd like us to be back here by noon, so in 20 minutes. And in the spirit of building, and we've been told to move this to the policy discussions, but I want to give you a little bit of homework. And there's a prize to be won. You see, when you're in academia, you get excited about prizes, so pardon me. But there's a prize to be won. Now that the biggest local content in the room, National Oil, has said that they're looking for branding, I'm excited about that. So I want us to think of a name. We can contribute to that conversation. Okay, so I'm giving you this time now over tea to think about a potential name. Should it be, because they start oil, can it be Ken Oil? There's Petrobus. Is there the Ken Bus? I'm just getting some of it started. But let's be creative. After all, this is ours. National Oil belongs to us as a country. Let's be creative, and then we shall do a formal presentation to Ken from this delegation that this name has been selected. So I will do a quick round after lunch to find out what your suggestions, but you have a brilliant one before they come and see me. There's a prize here to be given, so I mean, to be given. But on that I'd like to kindly proceed. The tea will be right on time, and let's come back at time for 20 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. So you guys have actually have to stop that's the main. Do you guys flexible? I'm very flexible. Like I have early morning will be 7:30. Late evening probably so the time that actually starts. Yeah, sure. If it's evening, do you work? Oh, then that will work. Yeah. So we can then see we can do that. That works. And that's probably so all these things what are
I do what? On the lower right. I'm seeing CPU recording live, dropped frames, something like that. Then they stop streaming, controls stop streaming. Yeah, it is on the no, on the top kuna controls, scene transitions, nectar, sources, and scene. Yes. Yes.